Hi everyone! I have lots of things to show you because this week I've been doing lots of different little projects and a big project in my doll's house. So my main task this week was to work on the brickwork on the outside of my doll's house. But in order to do this, I needed to complete some little tasks first. And one of these tasks was to decide how to fit a doorway here so that there's an entrance to the apartment. Because of course, this doll's house didn't used to be an apartment with a gallery space at the bottom. It used to be a house with stairs leading up, and I took the stairs out. So I'm actually planning on having an external staircase that leads up to this doorway. So I first of all had to cut out this doorway. Now obviously I'm using a Stanley knife here, please don't copy what I do. Just as I always say, I don't know the safest ways to do things, this is just a diary entry, not a tutorial. It came out fairly easily because the wood's quite thin. And the door that I have here is actually one from my Tudor doll's house that I'd taken out. So it was inside here and I kept it. In fact, I seem to have quite a few doors from different rooms that I've removed in different doll's houses, this one and the current one that I'm working on. And so I've decided to use this door as my external door. But I will probably paint it a different colour. I've not decided yet whether I want a dark colour or I might want a really bright colour. I've also not decided yet whether I'll add some windows to the door to make it look more like an external door instead of an internal door. If you've got any ideas, please do let me know in the comments. And I also needed to think about a little doorstep and a door frame as well. So the reason why I had to work on this project before starting my brickwork was because the brickwork is going to go around this space, and if I'd put bricks over where the door's going to be, I think it would have been a lot harder to then remove the bricks to fit the door. So this seemed the right order to do these little jobs in. I also needed to do something with this window. So when I bought my doll's house, this window frame was missing. I do have the little piece of plastic that makes the actual window to go behind the window frame, but I needed to think about how to make a window frame that matched the other ones. So these are actually all of the skirting boards and picture rails that I removed from this doll's house, which I kept. So I had a little look through them to see if I could use any of these pieces of wood for my new window frame. It actually looks like these pieces of wood that have been used for the skirting board have been varnished or stained in the same colour that the window frames have been varnished or stained in, which is really helpful. So I think that these skirting boards might make good window frames. They are slightly wider than the current window frames, and the picture rails are just a tiny bit wider than the bars that go across the windows, but I think that both of these types of wood will be useful. So I use these mitre shears just to trim down these skirting boards to make them the correct size to go around the window. And of course, I didn't use a ruler to measure, so you will notice in a minute or so that I do have to recut one of these pieces. Now at the moment, I've only made the outside of the window frame. I've not put any bars in it. I just wanted the window frame in place so that as I do the brickwork, I can work around it. I've not quite decided yet what I'm going to do about the bars across the middle of the window. I don't know whether to try and make this central window match the one to the left and the one to the right, therefore having bars that divide it into 12 sections, or whether to try and do something completely different. So one idea that I've had is that I could have just one large pane of glass and I could maybe try and make a stained glass window. I thought maybe the person that owns the art gallery could be living in the apartment and they could have maybe designed it themselves. I did have an idea that I could have a little balcony here with two doors that open out onto it, but that isn't something that I'm going to do because I don't think that the scale would be quite right. Another idea that I've had is to try and make a curved window, a little bit like a bay window that comes out and away from the wall. so it wouldn't be completely flat. If I do have a flat window, I have the options of maybe dividing it into 4 pieces, just so that the window panes would be a bit bigger so it wouldn't match the 2 either side. Or I could divide it into 6 pieces, 8 pieces, or like I said before, I could have it completely matching the 2 either side. Please let me know what you think. I'm not decided at all at the moment on how I should complete this window. So yeah, should I have it matching or should I do it completely different? Please let me know your ideas in the comments. So now that I was confident that I had all of the pieces of wood that were the correct size with the corners trimmed at the correct angles, I glued these pieces of wood down. I repositioned pieces of wood slightly just to make sure that they were all sat at the correct angle before the glue dried. So now it was time to start working on the brickwork. I started by putting some tape over my window frames so that they were protected. This is just tape, like decorator's tape that you might use for lining your skirting boards when you're decorating at home. And it was good because it meant that it wasn't so sticky that it was going to rip away any of the paint or varnish that was already on the window frames. If you've watched my Tudor Dollhouse Makeover playlist, you might have seen that I have made miniature bricks before, and the method that I used I thought was quite successful. So I'm going to use a similar method now, but there are some bits that I'm going to do a little bit differently because I just want to have a bit of an experiment to see if the effect will be even better. So the first thing that I decided to do was to make a stamp to make the brickwork pattern, and I wanted to use polymer clay to do this. I have a big basket here of polymer clay because I actually found a huge pile of polymer clay on the second-hand stall at a Dollhouse fair, and I bought it because I thought I'll definitely find that useful at some point. So I had a look through what colours I had and I decided to use the colour that I thought I was least likely to use for anything else, and that was the red polymer clay. Now you'll see here that I'm using a pasta roller. I think it's really important to say that this roller is never used for food. I bought this purely to roll out polymer clay. So it's really important to never use the tools that you use for crafting with food. So in this video as well, you'll see me use a spoon. I only ever use that spoon with my crafts. You'll see me use a measuring jug. Again, I only use that with my crafts. I use a baking tray only with my crafts. So I keep all of my tools like that completely separate so that they never enter anything to do with food preparation. I think that's really important to say. So as you can see, my polymer clay was really dry and it just crumbled when I put it through the roller. So I needed to try and make this polymer clay bind together a little bit better. So I did actually have some liquid polymer clay and I added a few drops just to make it a little bit softer. And then I started to mould it together. As I moulded it together, I then popped it back through the roller. Now this was quite a slow process. As you can see, as I put it through the roller, it then wasn't quite as crumbly, but it was still not really binding together very well. So I kept going through this process until it started to go through the roller and it was a lot stretchier and a lot more like polymer clay should be. But when it was at this stage, I did actually look at this and think this looks a little bit like poppy petals. So I have kept a few bits of this which I've baked in the oven because I'm going to try and use it in the future to make some poppies. So I kept going, and as you can see, it took a lot of attempts of putting this through the roller, squeezing it back together, putting it through the roller again, and so on and so forth until it was actually ready to use. I'd love to hear your experiences of working with polymer clay, because I found that every single time I've tried to use polymer clay, I've had to go through this process. I've never had any polymer clay that's just been ready to use straight away. I'd love to hear if that's the same for everybody or not. I have no idea. I'm not really very experienced with using polymer clay. So to make my stamp, I rolled out this polymer clay like this, and then I cut out little brick shapes. So as you can see in the top right where I've sped it up, I cut the brick shapes first, but I didn't actually remove them from the piece of polymer clay until all of them had been cut, because I wanted the polymer clay to keep its shape, and I thought that if I removed one brick at a time, I might end up moving the little lines of polymer clay that were left. So once I'd cut all of those little bricks out, I put it into the oven, and following the instructions on the packet, I baked it in the oven and then waited for it to cool. Now obviously I'm also going to mention here you must never bake your polymer clay in an oven with food. Okay, so this is what it was like when it was dry and cool. As you can see at the top of the tray there, that's the pieces that I've saved to try and make some poppies at some point. And at the front here, this was my new stamp. This was all an experiment. I didn't know whether it was going to work or not. So I had a look at the size of my stamp and decided to just trim the edge here so that I could go into a little alcove area in between the stonework there. My stamp cut nice and easily with scissors, which was good for this, but I was a little bit concerned that it meant that it wasn't particularly strong. So to make my brickwork, I was going to use some filler, and this is the same technique that I use for my brickwork on my Tudor doll's house. Obviously, if you're doing anything similar, please follow any instructions on the packet. Don't copy anything that I do. All fillers will be different. They'll have different consistencies that need mixing up. They'll have different drying times. They'll have different safety information. So please always read any instructions. Don't copy what I do. So I started by mixing some acrylic paint with some water, and this was the water that I was going to use to mix the filler powder. This is a step that I didn't do when I did my bricks for my Tudor doll's house, and I decided that this was an important step because what I found was when I painted my brickwork for my Tudor doll's house, it was quite hard to get all of the paint into every little bit of brickwork because I'd made quite a rough texture. And this meant that any bits where I didn't cover it in paint showed through quite clearly as being bright white. So I thought that if I added colour at this stage, if I do miss any of the bits of brick when I'm painting, it won't be quite as obvious and the colour will match a little bit better to what it would look like as a brick. So I took 3 tablespoons, or approximately 3 tablespoons of the filler, and mixed it with this water and acrylic paint solution. And I did find that this mixture was still a little bit too bright, so I decided to add a little bit more acrylic paint to it. Of course, because I was adding more liquid here, I then did have to add a little bit more of the filler powder. I tried to stay about 3 to 4 tablespoons of powder each time I was making up some of this filler, and the reason for that was I didn't want to make too much in one go because it starts to dry. So it was really important to only do this in small stages so that I didn't waste any of the filler. So I mixed it up to this consistency, and then I used a palette knife to add it to the doll's house. And I went straight over the top of the brickwork. This again was an experiment. Although I had done this on my Tudor doll's house, I wasn't working over the top of paper like I am here. So this brickwork is just paper that's stuck onto the doll's house. So I was hoping that it wasn't going to make the paper kind of come away from the doll's house. It seems fine at the moment. So I used this palette knife so that I could really smooth this down to make it a nice even coverage. And then after this, I took a sponge and I started to press onto this filler to make a textured surface. I felt like this stage was really important for making that realistic texture of bricks. Then I took my stamp and I pressed it into the filler. I did find that the top bits of my stamp were stopping me from placing it from exactly where I wanted to put it, so I did trim them off, and I think I ended up trimming the bottom bits off as well. Now initially I tried to press my stamp into place by using my sponge. I didn't want to press it with my fingers because I didn't want fingerprints in the filler. So I tried to press it in with the sponge, but I found that it didn't really press in enough. So then I found something that was a cylinder, and it was actually a film canister, you know, for an analogue camera. And I rolled this along, and this helped to push the stencil or the stamp into the filler a little bit better. To take the stamp out of the filler, I was just prising it away there, but every time I did this, I felt like it cracked a little bit. So can you see on the bottom row there, it's just separated where the polymer clay was really, really thin. So this obviously was going to be a problem. But you can see that it had stamped into the filler a lot better there. So I kept going with this technique, but as you can see on the right, there is now another area where the stamp had snapped. At this stage, I added some more filler. Pressed down again with a sponge, and then continued to work with my polymer clay stamp. But it broke again. So with every stamp that I did, it broke in a new area. Which was a shame because I really liked the effect that it was making. So I carried on working with this stamp, and I just removed this bottom bit here. But as I carried on working with it, it continued to break a little bit more. So in the morning, I decided to make a new stamp because I really liked the effect, but I felt like I needed to make a stamp that was a little bit stronger. So I actually started by making a little template out of greaseproof paper so that I knew how big some of the smaller areas were on the front of my doll's house, and I decided to make a stamp that would match this size. So this time I was using polymer clay again, but it was a lot thicker. And so I used the same technique. I added a little bit to the corner there just to make it a better shape. And I actually added a back piece to try and make it stronger so that as I pulled it away from the filler, it wasn't putting any pressure on the weakest parts of the stamp. You might have noticed that I also had little holes in the stamp. That was because I wanted to try and stop it from creating sort of an airlock and pulling the filler away from the house with each stamp. I don't know if that was effective or not, but anyway. I actually haven't got the footage. I did the sides of the doll's house first with my new stamps, but I didn't feel like they were making the impression that I wanted them to. They weren't really making much of an indent into the filler at all. So I decided not to use those stamps, and I went back to the method that I'd used with my Tudor doll's house. So with a kebab skewer, I just trimmed the end of the skewer off so that it wasn't really sharp, and I gently carved into the filler all of the lines in between the bricks. It took a while, but I'm really glad that I did it. Whilst the filler was still wet, I removed the tape just to make sure that there was no filler covering the window frames. I did this whilst the filler was wet so that I could pull it away easily. I also worked on the chimneys, and as you can see at the top, I decided to cover the chimney pots as well. I've also decided to leave one of those chimney pots a little bit broken and leaning to the side because I quite like it. I think it adds some character. I then made some bricks on a piece of cardboard, and in the morning they were dry. And the reason I did this was because I wanted to test out some paint colours. I haven't decided yet whether I want my brickwork around my house to be the colour of bricks or whether I want it to look like painted bricks, like a painted building. So I've done an experiment with some white paint and some black paint, and then I've also done an experiment with some acrylic paint, which is burnt sienna and umber, and I've sponged that on to try and make it look like bricks. So I would love your opinion on this. Do you think that my brickwork all around my house should be the colour of bricks? Do you think I should paint it all white? Do you think I should paint it black? Or do you think I should paint it a completely different colour? Because I really could do anything. I could paint it a really bright colour, I could paint a mural on it. I would really love to hear your opinion, so please do leave them in the comments. So at the moment I'm leaving those to dry. I'm going to wait and see what everybody thinks I should do with the brickwork, and I'm going to have a bit of a think. But now I'm going to show you my doll's house gallery floor, because obviously in the last video I'd been working on it and the video before that, and it still wasn't quite finished, and I said I would show you it in the next video. So I sanded it down and I removed the dust, and that lovely marble effect was there, and I was really pleased. It was now looking how I wanted it to look. It maybe wasn't shiny like I wanted it to be, but actually I quite like it like this. So I needed to give the gallery walls another coat of paint, which I've done now, and I've also bought some pieces of wood to use as skirting boards to go around the bottom, just to finish it off a little bit more neatly. I've not added them yet because, as I'll show you in a second, I have painted them, so they are now currently drying. So hopefully in the next video I'll be able to show you the doll's house with them in place. So this is what my doll's house is currently looking like. I would love to hear your opinions. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope that you have a really lovely week, and please do let me know what you think, and I'll see you next time.